All right, welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're opening up a case file that is, honestly, it's pretty chilling. We're looking at a fascinating collision between strict, cold, hard logic and the absolute unimaginable, right at one of London's most infamous locations. We're going to walk through the events of a single night, step by step, using the source material to try and understand exactly what happened. If you're the kind of person who thinks you can rationalize absolutely everything in the world, well, this explainer might just test those boundaries. Okay, let's dive into this.
So to really get a grip on this story, we first need to talk about our subject, Annie. She's a 25-year-old British journalist, and she's built quite a reputation for herself over the years. Her specialty? Debunking fake haunted locations. She relies completely on facts, right? Evidence. Technology. She planned to spend a single night in London to shoot a documentary, aiming to logically explain away the legends of this luxurious antique hotel. She had done this exact same routine a million times before, unmasking hoaxes for the world to see. But as we'll explore today, this assignment was going to be profoundly different.
And our target for this particular assignment? Room 333 at the prestigious Langham Hotel. The dark history of this specific suite is exactly what drew Annie here in the first place. According to the legend outlined in the source material, years ago, a doctor and his wife checked into room 333 to celebrate their honeymoon, but it ended in just unspeakable tragedy. The doctor actually murdered his wife right there in the room before ending his own life. And ever since that horrific event, rumors have just swirled that the murderous doctor's spirit still wanders the room. Annie, of course, was determined to prove this was nothing more than a scary campfire story. Yeah, the moment Annie stepped onto the third floor, things felt off. It was a completely jarring shift in the atmosphere. You know how luxury hotels usually feel? Bustling, full of life, soft carpeted elegance? Yeah. Not here. The third floor was completely deserted. The source notes that as Annie made her way down to the far end of the corridor, the environment actively deteriorated. The vintage paintings on the walls had lost all their color, totally faded by time. The wall lamps only gave off this dim yellow light that cast deep, really unsettling shadows. Even the carpet felt neglected, and every single step she took caused the wooden floorboards beneath her to creak loudly. It was this heavy isolation.
Actually, scratch that. The red flag started before she even got upstairs. Annie travels a lot for work, so she naturally expects the modern hotel standard, right? Electronic keycards, a warm, professional reception. But when she handed over her booking confirmation for room 333 to the receptionist, the reality was totally different. The source text tells us the receptionist's welcoming smile instantly vanished, just gone, replaced by a pale look of pure dread. Her hands literally stopped moving. When Annie asked what was wrong, the receptionist forced a fake smile, apologized, and handed her an old-fashioned physical key. Not a key card, a heavy physical key.
So, back upstairs, Annie finally reaches the dark, polished wood door of room 333. She grabs the heavy brass handle, and you guys, it is unnervingly freezing cold to the touch. Opening the door, she's greeted by pure darkness. After fumbling for the switch, she reveals a room heavily draped in Victorian-style decor. We're talking a large king-size bed, an antique dressing table, and perhaps the most unsettling feature for a supposedly haunted room, a massive, full-length mirror mounted on the wall directly facing the bed, just staring right at it. But hey, Annie's a pro. Despite the creepy aesthetics, her logical mind kicks right into gear. She goes to work with a highly systematic preparation. Step 1, the tripod goes up. Step 2, the camera is mounted and rolling. Step 3, the microphone is switched on. She was creating her web of objective truth. Her plan was super simple: document the room for the night, review the evidence in the morning, and move on. Feeling completely secure behind her wall of tech, she ordered a sandwich, ate, sat on the sofa, and actually ended up falling asleep while researching ghost sightings on her laptop. Well, that quiet? It didn't last. Sometime later, she is suddenly jolted awake by a knock at the door. Disoriented, she hears a man's voice call out, "Your room service, madam." Now Annie is incredibly confused. Her sandwich had been delivered and eaten much earlier in the evening. Assuming it's just a mix-up, she checks the peephole. Standing out in the empty corridor is a phantom butler, holding a tray covered by a large, domed lid. She opens the door to correct the mistake, but the butler simply insists it is indeed her order. Okay, this is where the source material takes a deeply terrifying turn. As the butler insists it's her order, he reaches down and lifts that heavy lid off the tray, and what was underneath wasn't food. Resting right there on the silver plate was Annie's own severed head. The sheer absolute horror of the sight caused Annie to let out a piercing scream, her eyes shutting tightly in panic. And when she forced her eyes open a fraction of a second later, the butler was gone. He simply vanished into thin air, leaving her completely alone in a silent corridor.
Obviously, she slams the door shut and bolts straight for her technological safety net, her cameras and audio gear. She expects hard evidence. She expects a video of the butler in the hall, or at the very least, audio of his knocking and his voice. But the actual reality? It was vastly different. Her camera's memory card was completely corrupted, totally unusable. Her voice recorder? It had captured absolutely nothing of the knock or the man. The only audio successfully recorded was the sound of her door opening, closing, and her own terrified screams. Her entire logical framework had just inexplicably collapsed on itself.
Let's quickly map out the timeline of that night to understand how fast things escalated. She arrived in the evening, got all set up. By nightfall, because it was November and chilly, she had lit a small fire in the fireplace. But by 1 a.m., the atmosphere completely shifted. Despite the fire burning brightly in the room, the temperature just plummeted. It became freezing cold. Desperate, overwhelmed, and really just trying to snap herself out of what she hoped was only a panic attack, she rushed into the bathroom to splash some cold water on her face.
So she's leaning over the running water, right? And as she looks up into the mirror from the sink, she sees him. Directly behind her in the reflection is an utterly terrifying apparition. The source describes him in vivid, horrifying detail. He had a rotting face, exceptionally long nails, and a pale white body dressed in torn, ragged Victorian-era clothing. But it was his eyes. They were this piercing, unnatural yellow. And in the mirror's reflection, she watches as his hands slowly reach out, moving directly toward her neck to choke her. She spins around, but the bathroom behind her is completely empty.
At this point, logic is entirely out the window. Pure panic takes over. Annie grabs her bags, frantically shoving whatever she can reach inside, and bolts for the heavy wooden door of room 333. She yanks on the brass handle, but no way. It won't budge. The door is completely locked from the inside. She is trapped. And at that exact moment, every single light in the room begins to violently flicker. And in those flashes of strobe-like darkness, she sees the terrifying man again, slowly walking toward her. Annie just starts screaming at the absolute top of her lungs, crying out desperately for someone, anyone to help. Down the hall, 2 or 3 hotel staff members hear these blood-curdling cries echoing out of room 333. And knowing the room's dark history, they don't hesitate for a second. They rush to the door, find it jammed, and use sheer force to finally break their way inside to rescue her. But what they found waiting for them wasn't a ghost. Here's the truly horrific twist. When the staff burst in, the room was totally empty of any Victorian men or ghostly apparitions. They only saw Annie, but she was in the bathroom, screaming wildly and violently smashing her own head into the shattered glass of the mirror. Shards of glass were literally embedded in her face. From the perspective of the staff, there was absolutely no attacker. Annie was doing this entirely to herself, seemingly gripped by an invisible, overwhelming force. They had to physically restrain her flailing limbs just to pull her away from the glass until she finally lost consciousness. Annie wakes up later down in the hotel's medical room. When she recounts the entire terrifying ordeal, the phantom butler, the rotting man, the hands gripping her head and forcing her face into the glass, a staff member reveals the final, horrifying puzzle piece. The entity she saw wasn't just some random ghost. It was the doctor. And the way she was being forced to smash her head into the mirror, that was his method. It was the exact brutal way he had murdered his own wife in that very room on their honeymoon decades prior. It's like he was using Annie to perfectly recreate his horrific crime.
Annie survived, but the source notes that the psychological scars of that night at the Langham Hotel, they're probably never going to leave her. She went in armed with logic, top-tier audiovisual technology, and absolute unwavering skepticism. And you know what? None of it mattered. None of it protected her. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. If all the evidence-based tools we rely on to understand our world can be rendered completely useless in a fraction of a second, would you dare spend a night in room 333? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.